And that was DW's Naomi Conrad reporting from the Pakistani city of Lahore. With me in the studio now, it's a pleasure to welcome Pakistan's ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany, Johar Salim. Welcome to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Amrita. It's a pleasure.
Now, we all agree that, a free press is critical for a democratic system. And yet we saw in that report some journalists in Pakistan do not feel safe to speak. Why is the press being intimidated ahead of this election?
Amrita, I could say, I wish I could say that I was amused by this report, what I saw, but I'm not. Actually, it was unfortunate because it's quite a misperception. And I see all those misperceptions being spread in the international media. Now, somebody like me, who knows Pakistan's democracy, who's been there as a student, we struggled in Zia's era for pro-democracy movements. And ever since, we have seen this march of democracy in Pakistan. And I can tell you that this election will bring more democracy to Pakistan. It's going to be a very free and fair elections. Even FAFN is that organization which has 400 NGOs in it, 40,000 observers.
But, Mr. Ambassador, if I may interrupt, all of us as journalists are following developments in Pakistan. There's been huge criticism of the media crackdown. You have channels which have been taken off air. You have newspapers which have been shut down. You have journalists who've been abducted and have gone missing. That doesn't speak of a very open and free atmosphere for reporting in Pakistan.
These are kind of generalizations. You pick 2 or 3 sporadic incidents, and then you try to just make some kind of deductions out of it, some conclusions out of it, which probably suits certain quarters. But the fact of the matter is, I'll quote one very interesting interview recently. There was this president of APNS, the All Pakistan News Association, Journalist Association, by BBC Hard Talk. And in that interview, Steve asked him, he said, give us some evidence, some specific examples.
Okay, let me give you one evidence here. Yeah. For example, one of the organizations in Pakistan, the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, and a direct quote for them, reaffirms the public perception that all parties have not been given equal freedom to run their election campaigns. Candidates from parties such as the PMLN, that is Nawaz Sharif's party, the former Prime Minister, the PPP, which is former Benazir Bhutto's party, and the Awami Workers' Party have reported being harassed by law enforcement and security personnel during their campaigns. Now, it is one of your own Pakistani organizations making these claims. Given that, what kind of free and fair election can you have now?
Well, I was quoting FAFN, like I said. This is just one. FAFN is a conglomerate of 400 NGOs and 40,000 observers in the last elections in 2013. And you know what FAFN says? FAFN says 90% of the politicians believe, more than 90% actually, that there's a level playing field for everyone there, So HRCP, unfortunately, some of these organizations in Pakistan, they get partial sometimes. But every day...
Why would they turn partial? Let me take another look, which you would say partial. The military, the role of the military. There's a huge perception within independent press in Pakistan as well as outside that the army is playing a critical role in this election. And some even say it is actually making sure that its favoured candidate, Imran Khan, a star cricketer, a cricket star and now a politician, they're trying to ensure that he comes to power.
I've read those reports as well. But let me tell you something. If on the day of the election, there'll be 100 million people voting. And these 300,000 military that you mentioned, they'll be there just to ensure that. And this has happened in the previous elections as well, by the way. There are security threats in Pakistan. There have been those bomb attacks and everything. We cannot have election in a climate of fear. So they will ensure that it does not have... So if anybody thinks that they can hijack elections from those 100,000 people when we have had electoral reforms, which will make sure that this election is much more transparent than the previous, any of the previous elections, I have no doubt in my mind that there's no possibility, either there's no intent, there's no will in any quarters. And I think this is part of look what happens in Pakistan. If somebody is caught for corruption, And this has happened across the board.
Ambassador, these are criticisms coming from within Pakistan, not just from outside. So obviously there seems to be some perception there that the military is trying to influence elections. And you're saying the military is there to bring security. To some extent, that's definitely the case.
First of all, that. Secondly,
but others fear that the military will intimidate voters into voting in one direction.
Not at all. I think military is there, first of all, to bring security, because there's no climate of fear. Second of all, I think a lot of things that have taken place recently, and those are unprecedented. In Pakistan, people always used to say that the corrupt never get punished, particularly the white-collar crime, the rich, you know. But that is happening now. And that is very important because you cannot have democracy without accountability.
That's right. And that is where the problem actually lies, accountability. And when you talk about corruption, many would say that it's being selectively applied against political targets. But I want to just bring one final question.
Let me give you examples on that.
Yeah.
People from PTI, Imran Khan's party, people from PMLN, people from People's Party, Zardari's party. Across the board, the accountability is happening. So there no partiality there.
Final question for you, Ambassador. Now, extremist parties are also contesting this election. To give you one example, Hafiz Muhammad Saeed, he's one of the people who's implicated in the masterminding the Mumbai attacks. His party, under a new name, is also contesting elections. Are you worried that extremist parties may become part of the mainstream after this election?
Amrita, let me tell you something. We are here in Berlin. In this city, there are streets named after people who were militants, and then they became mainstream politicians, and then they actually got Nobel Prize for peace, you know. So the point is, I mean, if there are certain, let's say there are certain organizations who disavow violence, who want to then work within the Constitution, and, you know, within the Constitution, anybody, you know, can profess whatever beliefs they have, which are not really, not inciting anybody for violence, not trying to break the Constitution in any way. Yeah, and then people decide. This has happened in many parts of the world, and these are, you know, these are not sort of, you know, Mumbai attacks. I can go on that. You know, there are lots of sort of, you know, like question marks about India's role in that. So let's not talk about that. But the point is that in Pakistan, it's not the militants who are allowed, you know, who are being allowed to contest in elections. It's actually the people who had, let's say, at some point, extremist ideologies, but then they disavowed those ideologies. They want to be part of the mainstream politics. So why shouldn't they be given this chance?
Okay, interesting topic. Lots of controversial issues. Thank you for answering a lot of those questions. Johar Salim, Pakistan's ambassador to Germany. It was a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you for having me here.